Welcome to the M&A Unplugged podcast. Our mission is to help you be better prepared for your business acquisition or sale. Being prepared will ensure you maximize returns and minimize risks. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Dominic Rinaldi.
Welcome back to the M&A Unplugged podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Rinaldi. So pleased to have Tim Leahy on the show today. Tim recently acquired a home technology business that he will own and operate, one that will hopefully provide him with both personal and financial freedom. I first met Tim when he was in the early stages of acquiring a business and had the opportunity to do a brief consult. The result of that consult was that we identified areas where he either needed more preparation or professional assistance. In his words, he knew he needed a jungle guide. In all my years of doing M&A deals, that is the first time I've heard M&A advisors referred to as jungle guides, but it's a spot-on description. In this episode, Tim and I discuss how he realized being an entrepreneur was right for him, the process of narrowing down his search criteria, the highs and lows in the acquisition process, and his approach to ensuring a smooth transition. Tim is very candid about his journey, one that all would-be first-time buyers would want to listen to. But before we get into today's episode, if you want to avoid the common deal pitfalls and the risk of losing substantial dollars, you need to know how ready you really are to buy a business. Because I believe proper preparation is so critical to your deal success, we have published a catalog of free resources to help you be better prepared. You can access these resources on our website at k2advisor.com/resources. Being prepared is critical to ensuring that you maximize returns and minimize risks. Thank you for being here today and hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, Tim, welcome to M&A Unplugged.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here and dive into your new acquisition, your first acquisition. Congratulations.
Thanks. It's already been a journey.
I think as you just described to me a few minutes ago, it's been 6 weeks, but it feels like 6 months, huh?
That's right. I've aged a little bit. I'm not getting the gray hair yet, but it's coming. Yeah.
So I'm excited to have you share your journey with everybody, but why don't you just spend a minute talking about the business that you acquired, and then we'll go back to the beginning and we'll talk about your journey.
Sure. Yeah. So on February 1st, I acquired Home Run Technology. And Home Run Technology has been in business for just over 20 years. And traditionally, probably we all think of Home Run Technology as your classic audio visual company. So maybe in the 90s or in the early 2000s, they would help with the first edition plasma or stereo system. But as we all know, technology in the home has compounded and accelerated by a massive degree. And so what Home Run Technology does is they fit in an industry that not a lot of us know what it's called, but what they call it is custom integration. Custom integration really is the industry that allows all these different interesting technologies to applied in a custom way inside your home or business. And they have the expertise and knowledge to make all these things sing and dance. And it's way beyond TVs and stereos now. What Home Run really accelerates well into is not only just the classic AV, but also lightings and shades automation and installs, and then network as well. And, I think we all can recognize in the past year, the reliability and dependence on our technology in home has gone through the roof. I would like to say that that's where I saw where the puck was going when I started this journey, but I didn't. And but I actually think we're not even really at the potential where technology is going to get even more complicated in our home. So
I think you're in a great space with great timing. Technology in the home has already accelerated, and it's going to take off here over the next couple of years. So I'm excited for you. and I'm excited to see what you do with this business.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited.
So we're going to talk about why this business fits for you and, what excited you. But I want to really go back to the beginning. When did you first start thinking that owning a business was maybe in the cards for you?
There was a specific moment. I will say that before that moment, the idea of being an entrepreneur was always kind of in my blood, in my head. And I didn't really tie the two together, but both of my mom's dad and my dad's dad were small business owners. And I don't remember early on thinking that was a cool idea yet, but as I got older, I particularly remember my mom's daddy ran a paper company, and I remember seeing paper boxes all over their house and just thinking how cool it was that he was a small business owner. But, I graduated from college, I got into a sales job, and then I did well at that. And it was actually, interestingly enough, that sales job was in technology. I sold technology to public school districts for what we know in Chicago as CDW and CDWG. But I didn't want to make a career out of that, so I joined in finance. And my career in finance, there were opportunities to scratch the itch of being an entrepreneur. But what really happened for me was when I was in business school at night, and a gentleman came to a class. I actually majored in entrepreneurship and innovation. And he talked about his journey from leaving his commercial real estate job to buy a small business. And it always stuck with me. I took rigorous notes, probably the most detailed notes I took during business school. And fast forward to about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I just had this moment where I was driving to work. I didn't usually drive to work, but I was in the car, and I said, I think it's time. And I think this is the avenue I want to go down. And I had no idea what to do. And so I kind of used the power of the internet and tried to find this gentleman's name. And he wasn't really public on the internet, but I found it, shot him an email. He wrote back to me.
This was the gentleman who had come to your business school class?
Yeah.
And lecture.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
at Northwestern. And, we've all probably been there. We're like, no one's going to write me back. And he wrote back that day. He ends up living in the same area as I do. We end up having coffee on that Friday. And for probably 3 or 4 hours, he just kind of talked through a lot of his journey, more in detail than I would have imagined. And that just gave me the confidence to say, okay, here's a rough playbook of what to do. And, let's start from there. And so I started that process, and ultimately I got to Sun Acquisitions. And that's when you and I kind of first met and talked. Yeah.
So before you got to us, though, what had you done up to that point in time? Had you started to look at businesses? Where did you start? How did you start the journey? And I know at some point in time you sort of stopped and took a breather, and you contacted us, and then we engaged and helped you. But before that point in time, what were the things that you were doing?
I talked to a lot of people, and then I was lucky enough to, having a sales background, you develop a pretty thick skin. You also develop kind of a comfortability around a low hit rate. I knew that if I put my feelers out as much as I could and really learned from as many people as I could, the better off I'd be. And so I started talking to lawyers. I started talking to business brokers. I didn't really get down looking at businesses for sale. I did start a little bit on the internet just to get an idea, but immediately it didn't feel like the depth I wanted. Mm-hmm. And as I interviewed and talked to more people and some individual business brokers, lawyers, everything else, the more I learned about what I thought I needed as almost a jungle guide going through this. Because, as much as I got so much information from the gentleman who spoke in my class, that got me to a point, and I needed enough comfortability around what I was going into. I was looking at leaving a really great career. I'm a father of 3 young kids. I didn't want to step into this journey without a competent jungle guide. And what I learned through before I got to you all was just more around what I needed and what I didn't. That they helped refine that idea of what I was looking for.
Wow, I have to say, I've been doing this a very long time, and this is the first time I've heard jungle guide. I'm going to steal that from you if you don't mind. I think that's awesome because
that's a compliment.
It can be the jungle. There's no doubt, and it's fraught with all sorts of insects and problems and areas that can trip you up. In all of your discussions with lawyers and accountants and business brokers, did you gain more confidence, though, that this was the right path? Or was there a point in time where you took a step back and said, oh, wait a minute, this is maybe more than I'm willing to bite off?
I would definitely not be, for sure. I had moments of pause. Yeah. And not in the sense of this isn't going to work, but it kind of broadened my idea of the size of the effort, and all I had in my head was, this is what you do, and you go do it. And then as I talked to folks, the more I learned of like, okay, this effort's bigger and bigger and bigger. It's to do a search for a business, to talk to business, to do due diligence. These are big efforts. And I had to pause at those moments to say, can I do this on the nights and weekends while still holding a job? Can I do this while being a father and a husband and a friend? Like I didn't want to disappear from my career, from my life. And those were the pauses. But in terms of the confidence or like, was this what I wanted to do? I didn't have a lot of those moments. I still kind of chugged ahead because I said, okay, this is what it takes to do it. I just had a different idea of how much effort it would take.
Yeah. And I think that was very intuitive and smart on your part. As now having gone through the process, you can look back and how much time and effort goes into this. And just even sourcing opportunities, that in of itself, if you're working, it is a full-time job just to source opportunities, let alone do all the other pieces. And so that was very intuitive up front. And I will say that other clients that we work with that don't decide to engage right away, one of the places where they trip up the most is they just can't find opportunities. And they're in stuck mode for a very long period of time, and then they get frustrated. And that's no good. And they lose steam, and all that excitement sort of gets, dampened by the fact that the process is hard.
Yeah, it is hard. And it was important to me that if I started the process and it didn't work out, that I wasn't losing ground in my career. And when I was getting advice, a lot of advice I had was that it's very difficult to do both. And you have to be careful. You need to make sure that you realize it is almost a second job. The other thing I also learned was the idea about search funds, which I didn't really think about, but that was almost you leave your career, you start a search fund, you try to get funded to pay for that time that you're spending to try to find a business. And I knew I wanted to go at this alone, not because I'm a lone ranger, just because it was important for that agency just to be with me. But you start to understand with these things, like this can't be a hobby. Yeah. And that was actually also verifying for me that this was the right path forward, because I knew if that's what it took to be a business owner, I can't imagine what it's going to be to actually own a business.
So let's start with, you didn't set out to buy a technology media company, right? I mean, that's not something that was on the slate. Yet you've gotten to the point where, this is your fit and you're going to move forward with this business. But what was that process like for you, going through the discovery of, what prospective businesses might work for you? And also maybe what did you know wouldn't work for you?
I had a very large, you know, I casted a wide net. And what I stole a phrase from the gentleman who spoke in my class. You're trying to look for something dusty, not rusty, you know, and I knew that I was going to apply a lot of energy to a small business, and that energy was going to be the asset. But if it was rusty and if it wasn't kind of ready to move, my energy wasn't going to do anything. So if you apply that to a broad stroke of industries, it can apply to a lot of things. And, you know, what was helpful for me was certainly working with Larry and your team, because he applied questions. He didn't say, stop being so broad. He helped me just ask questions as we go through. And home technology was in there. Larry's memory is probably a little bit sharper than mine, but I remember from the early days, I'm an enthusiast for technology. An endearing term might be, you know, a nerd or a geek. I would take that too. But I had believed from the beginning about this idea of home technology. I just wasn't sure how to, I didn't want to just stick with that and go. So we looked at a lot of different industries, some that, you know, would just have nothing to do with technology. But as we asked questions, you know, one of the things I'll never forget that Larry said to me is, as we were going through a couple of iterations, was, you know, you just have to ask yourself when you wake up in the morning, are you going to be excited to go to work? Mm-hmm. And I had heard similar advice at the beginning. You know, I heard a story about looking at, you know, a car service company. This was a story about way before Uber, but a guy was looking at a car service company, and the broker said, you know, do you really want to be driving people at the airport at 1 a.m.? And I think it's smart advice, because as curious and innovative people who are probably on this journey, you're thinking of a lot of possibilities, but that framework narrows things down to a much more digestible focus. And that once Larry asked me that question, it was right away. That's how we wanted to look at home technology. And from there, our search was strictly in that industry.
Yeah. And for anybody listening that wants to do a search, really narrowing down to a sector or two is so critical, because you can cast this wide net and you can look at lots of different businesses, and that's fine. I mean, that is one way to look for businesses, but you're typically then looking at business for sale websites, and you're in lots of competition. But when you can narrow down to a couple of sectors, the hope is you can now go make a market for yourself and get proprietary, discrete opportunities that aren't on the market for sale, which is what you did in the market. And that allowed you to, you know, identify opportunities and negotiate one-on-one and not have to worry about other parties.
Yeah. And we learned as we did the industry research, just the fragmentation specifically in the region of the Midwest was really high. And that was the interesting kind of note for me too, as well, because historically custom integration in our area hasn't seen a lot of consolidation, hasn't seen, there's been a couple of big bites from acquisitions, but not on the smaller side. I really appreciate that piece of advice, because that's an additional piece of anxiety that I didn't experience, was a rush or an urgency. It allowed me to go through it methodically and not feel that we were losing opportunities because I was taking my time, frankly.
Right. Exactly. Whereas you might be forced to have to make an offer if you're in an auction process, right? And make a mistake.
Right.
So Tim, lots involved in getting a deal done, but maybe you could cover for us the 2 or 3 things in the process that surprised you to the good, and maybe 2 or 3 things that you were like, oh goodness, I never thought that would happen. So maybe uncover the process a little bit for our listeners.
Yeah. I think it's important for the listeners to note that I did start this process right before COVID. Yeah. And so my experience of search and acquisition was done entirely remote, entirely virtual, up until obviously the important points of once I had circled in and talked to the owners, the search process was entirely virtual. So that actually, I thought it allowed us to be much more nimble. I know that traditionally that trade-off of not meeting in person, we might have missed something, or that just one-on-one does have that presence as helpful. But that was, we were able to do a lot of interviews, I think, in a shorter period of time. And that was a positive kind of discovery of like, oh, wow, we're really moving through a lot of these companies and getting to know. And, frankly, those interviews educated me more and more about the industry. So by the time I got to even more interviews, I knew kind of the holes to which I cared about to ask specific questions.
Do you remember do you remember how many companies you interviewed roughly?
For home technology, I want to say it was north of 10.
Wow, that's a lot.
From an initial interview. And I would say outside of that, I think it was just a handful of outside of home technology. Once that early discovery of this is the industry for me happened fairly early. Yes. But so we dove right in. And so that was a positive. I would also say, the other really, I'm being in finance, numbers is a very comfortable space for me. And as we started to gather information in the numbers, where I had an expectation that I would, be going through Excel spreadsheets until my eyes turned, red. And cause that's an easy rabbit hole I could go down. But I was surprised and also encouraged that there was a lot of assistance, not only from your team, but when we actually hired Miller Cooper to do their due diligence, it just allowed me to focus on the bigger picture and not get super into the numbers. I had a lot of confidence in your team and our due diligence to know, okay, I don't need to go down the rabbit hole. I need to make sure things are as tidy and as understanding as possible, but I wasn't going to get lost in the numbers too much.
Yeah. And you had a great accounting firm in Miller Cooper to do this sort of work. They've got a group that specializes in this.
Yeah.
They're fantastic. So you were in good hands.
They were great. And
I will point out the other benefit of focusing on an industry is, like the point you just made a minute ago, you really got to know the industry. You were having a lot of meetings and you were learning stuff on the fly, and you got to really understand what was important and what wasn't important, what you liked, what you didn't like. And when you look at, industry businesses in different industries, you never get that perspective. You're looking at a manufacturing business one day and a distribution business the next day. You have no comparisons. We're big believers in focusing on sectors, and it doesn't have to be one, could be a couple, but it really gives you a unique advantage as a buyer.
Absolutely. And in this industry, because it's so heavily fragmented, I wouldn't have felt as confident as I did with the Home Run Technology acquisition, because once I was able to interview the owners and understand their business model and their approach, that helped me say, okay, this is why they're different than the others, and this is what they offer that are different than the others.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the surprising things that made me pause, I think for me, there's nothing that scared me. I do want to say that I feel like I was really lucky because it's a dual ownership, or it was a dual ownership, and the owners were very, very supportive. They were open. They were encouraging. Again, about our search processes, we proactively talked to companies. We weren't looking at companies necessarily already for sale. So by talking to them and asking if you'd be interested, once they had made that decision, they were extremely supportive and had kind of been encouraged by my vision and energy. So I didn't, and trust me, through all those conversations I did have, and your team knows this much more than I do. There are probably some really scary stories out there by owners who just have hesitation, or owners that may be hiding things. I didn't feel that. I haven't felt that since post-acquisition. I think that the times where I definitely had pause, it was a tough year for everyone. Everything going on from COVID, and there was a lot going on with me in terms of work and everything else. And you're trying to do these things all at once. So the only moments I had of, oh geez, like, is this worth it? Is this what I want to do? Had to just do with my own process and my own analysis. I think for me, I also had scoped out maybe a bigger acquisition size, not because I wanted to go whale hunting, but I had worked in corporate America for 15 years, and I worked at a fairly large bank here in Chicago. And to think about going from big to extra small definitely gave me pause. I also had a lot of confidence that was a huge opportunity. And what I was really excited about Home Run was there was a really solid foundation. And in custom integration, you do have a lot of individuals who are running their own businesses out of their house, who then use contractors. And there was no point in acquiring a business like that, because essentially it's just an acqui-hire. Yeah. So I know probably your listeners are looking for a scary, dramatic story. I don't really have one, except for maybe the chills, you get at night, or when you wake up in the morning and you're like, is this really happening? But I think that's normal.
It is. We hear that from a lot of buyers. There's a moment in every deal where, they know it's about to happen, and it's the moment of truth, right? Yeah. And are they really all in? And most, wind up fine. Some really have some struggles with that, and that takes some hand-holding, but no doubt. How about now, you financed this transaction with an SBA loan. How was your experience going through the financing process? And, did that go the way you had hoped it would go?
So first off, the SBA program is an amazing program. And I knew that before getting into this. My career in finance was in the housing market. So, I think I've built a belief that there's a certain role that the government can play to help really catalyze things. And the SBA program in itself was something that I was just really, if you really want to support small business in the US, this program allows people like me to do that. And that risk tolerance completely changes, not only from the individual side, but the lender side, if the program wasn't there. Right. Now, it was, the warnings I had before doing it was, it's pretty extensive. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of things you need to worry about. The idea of a personal guarantee was new, mm-hmm. but I had all these conversations where it's kind of table stakes, and I just felt some comfortability around that. What really was challenging is that we were onboarding funding as COVID relief packages were coming out. And there wasn't a lot of clarity of how those packages would help or would not help. And for me, I probably applied too much optimism that these things would help aid, the transaction. And when the clarity was pulled away, that was tough. Yeah. That was difficult, because you get your hopes up. And so you think, okay, this is actually going to make this transaction much more digestible. Yeah. And then it's so right. That's no one's fault. The government itself, this was in September, November, December timeline in 2020. There wasn't a lot of clarity coming through.
Yeah. Yeah. You got caught up in the in-between time, unfortunately. So you didn't get the full advantage of some of the current programs. But the SBA program, nonetheless, is a tremendous package especially for deals that have loan values of $5 million or less. The 10-year amortization and the low interest rates, access to working capital. It's a tremendous program. when you compare it to conventional lending, where amortizations are 3 to 5 years, and yes, you don't have a personal guarantee, but you also don't get some of the other benefits of SBA. So it's a trade-off, but at the end of the day, it's a hell of a program.
It really is. And the other complication was, how do you acquire a business that may or may not have participated in the PPP program?
Yes.
And I just think that there was a lot of small businesses. There was hardly any, I would imagine, that didn't participate. And at the time, I know that you're probably on the sell side, that there was probably a lot of sellers who were concerned because the forgiveness process was differing between lender to lender, and what was free and clear was hard. So those were, it was a pretty smooth process. I'm sure this is typical right up until the end, but that's really because the information that was coming out was hard for both the sellers and myself to figure out. But I would echo completely that, there's a lot of work involved to make sure that you qualify. But if you understand what the SBA program is doing in terms of backstopping the loan, you can understand why they do that. And frankly, I think I had benefited coming from banking, almost having empathy, which is maybe a dark word for underwriting, but having the empathy for the underwriting process, you're like, this is the lay of the land. So I would absolutely worth it.
Yeah. So let's move to, you've now acquired the business. You've been in it for 6 weeks. What's transition been like? Talk a little bit about what you've experienced, highs, lows, how it's gone.
Sure. Well, I mean, as we talked about, I think it's a good thing that 6 weeks has felt like 6 months, because I think for me that feels like, okay, I'm getting my feet on the ground. And, I don't know a lot of people that can say that first meeting, that first day isn't awkward. Mm-hmm. I can, I'm sure the team will listen to this. It was awkward for everyone. And that was unsettling to me, because you have this vision of like, all right, let's go and let's do this. But it was really good. It was a really good first day. And as the first week progressed, I mean, the team around the Home Run had established had been together for a long time. So there was a loyalty and an understanding of each other that I was the new guy. And I made that very clear that that's okay. I'm not trying to enter into this loyalty package, this loyalty group on day one. So that they were really open to that. There was a lot of things I knew I wanted to do out of the gate. The team there was one of the technicians had left in the late fall, early winter of 2020. And so they were essentially down an employee. So that was kind of step one, is I wanted to get support back. Our business is headcount driven. We look at things as best you can on a, revenue per billable employee. So theoretically, the more employees you get, the more business you can do, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't work overnight, but you can feel confident that when you're investing in the right technicians, you're gonna hopefully open the ability to get more sales. I had a plan in my head, and I'd written it down, of where I wanted the first 100 days to go, mm-hmm. and where I wanted the first 45 days to go. And I can't remember who your guest was, but there was someone who talked about, if you can define in the first 45 days roles and responsibilities, you're ahead of the game. Mm-hmm. And I forget your guest's name, but that piece of advice really stuck with me.
Jen Goldman.
Yeah, Jen Goldman. And I didn't try to make that. What I was careful of doing is not saying, you do this, you do that, you do this the first day. Yeah. What I've been doing, and this is still going on, is letting things happen to a degree, but talking and having a lot of conversations to see where the pieces fall into place. Right. And I think if we do that in the first, we're at least in the first 100 days, we'll be in a really good spot. So that's been good. I bought a van. I was really excited about that because we were really supporting the business out of the employees' personal cars. I think what that was really, I think, important for me is to show the team a sign of good faith that this was, we're going to invest, and we're going to invest to grow, and we're going to invest the things that make your job better and our work better. And, I'm proud of that van, and I'm proud of and I think that'll be one of many. So those are some of the good things.
How about the owners? Did you sit down with the owners and have a plan with the owners on what transition would look like and their roles and their thoughts on what they thought a good transition would look like?
Yeah, that was a big part of of the discussion, both before the acquisition and then after. And, with dual ownership, there are probably some natural skills that they had both gravitated towards that complemented each other. And where they were at was they were overlapping a lot of things. They were both doing a lot of different things. And what we saw an advantage is that, in lightings and shades, particularly in our industry, it's becoming more technology focused. And one of the owners had already started to kind of start to plant those seeds. And we just said, why don't you just do that full time and really make that a growth department for the company? And, I think that was, I don't want to speak for him because I think it's unfair, but I think that there was an agreement that would work. I think any listener should know that if you can read or understand change management, just to, there's a great, John Kohler does a great, change is hard, and you have to understand that you have to be empathetic. Mm-hmm. And I think as an exciting, energetic new owner, you want to go in there and be like, we're going to do it this way tomorrow. You have to be patient. You have to be empathetic. And I really felt that respect for the two owners. And we've applied that, I think, very well. Their support has helped me feel comfortable at the end of the day. I don't think it's been easy for them. I don't think it's been easy for anyone. But as long as I've just made it clear to them that I understand this is difficult and that things are going to change, they know I'm not just there to, move their stuff around. There's a ton of emotional equity in a business that's been around for 20 years. Sure. It started from scratch. And I think for any of your listeners, you need to respect that. As much as you may see things differently, that experience is a tool that you're going to need, whether you think it was done poorly before or not. Yep. They're their own jungle guides.
Absolutely. The last thing that a former owner wants to hear is that you think their baby is ugly, and start to change everything, undo everything they've done. It's also a mistake because you haven't spent any real time in the business. You start making those changes day one. You may be sorry 2-3 months, a year later, because you just didn't have enough information.
Yeah. I listen, I came from a career that ended at the bank with a lot of techniques and skills I learned. And I was an internal consultant. So I learned tools and process improvement like Lean Six Sigma and change management. That's great. That's a great playbook to have in your back pocket. But to just go in there and say, let's do things. I remember the first thing I did, which I thought was, I hopefully didn't send a bad signal, is I took down some pictures on the wall and put up a whiteboard. And talk about, don't calling your baby ugly. Imagine going to someone's home and being like, all right, let's take down the family photos, right. And put a workspace. So I think they got what I was trying to do. And the day after I put that whiteboard up, we walked through some of the processes. And I hopefully that demonstrated to them, like, I'm willing to learn, and let's hear about your ideas for making it better.
So important. Listen, learn, ask questions, get your arms around it. Doesn't mean that change doesn't have to happen, but do it with all the information, not half the information. Well, Tim, as we get ready to wrap up here, I'm really excited for you. If there was a big message or a couple of things that you would leave the audience about, approaching buying a business, what advice would you have if you were to pull it all together?
At the end of the day, you have to really want to do this. I think feels like that's felt like so cliche coming out of my mouth, but what has set my compass right is that how, no matter how difficult, challenging, or fun the past 6 weeks has been, if your gut and you've settled just at your core that this is what you want to do, then you'll continue to be persistent and patient. And I think that's an important assessment that anyone who's diving into this needs to think about, because if you have any doubts, when the rubber hits the road and those difficult days hit, it's going to be a lot tougher. And in some degree, you got to really want to find this fun. And it is fun. This is the world of small business is such an important part of our economy. There's such a need, and the challenge of figuring it all out is fun.
Yeah.
And I know there's probably some current owners listening to this that probably think I'm crazy, but if you look at it as fun and as exciting, the people challenges, the operational challenges, the financial challenges, you can look at those as puzzles to ultimately, figure out. And I wish I had that rosy picture every day, but at the end of the day, that's where I settled. And that would be my advice for anyone who's just maybe thinking about this.
Yeah.
Really try to vision going forward if this is going to be something you're going to wake up every morning and be like, okay, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's awesome advice. So Tim, assuming anybody in the audience needs some home technology, how can they reach you?
Sure. So, when we're recording this, we're currently still Home Run Technology. Because I did go to a business school, I probably overthink a brand change was important, but we are going to be changing our company name to Our Home. So you will be able to find us at homerun-tech.com, or our new site will be up and running at the end of April 2021, and that'll be ourhome.co.
.co. OURHOME.co.
Actually, RHOME.co, but thank you for clarifying.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for the clarification. All right.
Yeah. So
Right.
it's you should be seeing it, with vans running around the suburbs and everything else. I think we're really excited about the brand change. And if you want to reach me individually, I'm happy to give out my email. It's Tim Leahy, TIMLAHEY at RHOME.co.
All right. Tim, thank you so much for coming on the show. Congratulations, and wish you the best.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed this episode. All of today's information will be available in the show notes. If you enjoy our content, please remember to subscribe and review our podcast. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. And until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.